They thought no one would see it. A truck disappearing into the fog, and behind it, 3 silent lives strung up like trash. But fate doesn't always stay quiet. One man, grieving, withdrawn, done with the world, took the wrong road home. What he found would pull him back into it. Stay with us. And before we begin, tap like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? Because this story, you'll carry it with you long after it ends. The road cutting through the forest outside of Rainmere, Oregon, was slick with rain, the kind that clung to every surface and muted even the sharpest of sounds. Mist hung low, crawling like fingers across the cracked asphalt, and the sky above was a flat sheet of gray, pressed down by clouds heavy with unshed tears. Nathan Cole, a man of 43 with a broad frame, a weathered face, and dark brown hair streaked with premature gray, kept his eyes steady on the winding back road as his old Jeep growled beneath him. His beard, trimmed but rough, framed a jaw that rarely moved into anything resembling a smile. His eyes, once green and bright, had dulled into something more hollow over the years, the kind of stare that had seen too much and said too little. Rainmere was the kind of town where the trees outnumbered people, and Nathan liked it that way. After losing his wife Rachel and their 6-year-old daughter Molly in a car accident 3 winters ago, he had sold their house in Portland and moved out here into the cabin his grandfather had built decades earlier. It was solitude he was after, not healing. He never believed in that word, not anymore. Earlier that morning, he had set out with his rifle slung over one shoulder, looking to track deer but more likely chasing silence. He hadn't fired a shot. Instead, he had driven further into the forest than usual, taking roads with no signs and no traffic. As the fog grew thicker, he decided to head home. That was when he saw the truck. It was an old red Ford F-150, maybe late 80s model, with dents across the tailgate and a busted rear light. It wobbled slightly as it moved, not fast, but uncertain, as if the driver was either lost or too drunk to care. At first, Nathan didn't think much of it, until he noticed the things hanging from the back, 3 of them, identical in size and shape, bobbing unnaturally with every bump in the road. At a glance, he thought they might be sacks or tools, maybe something tied down poorly. But something about the way they moved made his stomach tighten. He pressed the gas pedal just enough to close the distance, squinting through the fog and the rain streaks on the windshield. As he drew nearer, his chest grew heavy. The things weren't sacks. They were bodies, small bodies, and they were moving. Nathan's hands gripped the wheel hard. He pulled alongside the truck and gave a single honk. No response. Through the blurry side window, he could make out the outline of a man-thin with a hunched posture and a cigarette perched in the corner of his mouth. Nathan honked again, longer this time, and waved out the driver's side window. The man turned his head, frowning, then eased his truck onto the muddy shoulder. Nathan followed, parking behind him. The rain was a light drizzle now, but the air was biting cold. Nathan stepped out, boots crunching over wet gravel, and hurried to the back of the pickup. His breath caught in his throat. 3 German Shepherd puppies, no more than 6 or 7 weeks old, hung from a crude wooden plank mounted vertically on the tailgate. Each pup was tied around the neck with thick, frayed rope, their paws barely touching the truck bed. One of them, a darker one, almost black, was trembling violently. Another, gray with a faint tan belly, had gone limp, though its chest still rose weakly. The third, a light cream-colored pup with wide, terrified eyes, let out the faintest whimper, a sound so broken it pierced Nathan's marrow. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Nathan's voice was quiet but carved with fury. The man stepped out from the cab, his face angular, eyes narrowed, skin like old leather. He wore a greasy cap and a flannel shirt, several sizes too large. "They're fine," he muttered. "They just don't stay in the crate. This keeps them still." Nathan didn't argue. He pulled the folding knife from his back pocket and started cutting the ropes. One by one, he caught the pups in his arms as they dropped. The black one flailed weakly before collapsing against his chest. The tan one squirmed, then clung to his jacket. The gray one barely moved at all. The man shrugged, Don't know why you're getting all worked up. They're no good. Too skittish. Soft little things. Nathan didn't even look at him. What's your name? Billy. Billy Harrow. Not that it matters. Nathan glared at him, then turned and walked back to his Jeep, pups in his arms, ignoring the rain and the numb creeping into his fingers. He laid them gently on the back seat, pulling an old wool blanket from under the seat to wrap around them. The black one licked his hand once. The tan one buried her nose into his arm. The gray one lay silently, curled as tight as a wounded bird. Nathan closed the door, returned to the driver's seat, and started the engine. The man stood watching him, arms crossed, but didn't say another word. The fog had started to thin now, the road slowly revealing itself as the Jeep pulled away. Behind him, the red truck disappeared into the trees. He didn't know what these dogs had been through, but he knew this, whatever came next, they wouldn't suffer it alone. Nathan's cabin sat quietly beneath the weight of the rain-soaked pines, its weathered wood darkened by moisture and age. The old metal roof pinged with each drop, a lullaby for ghosts and silence. Inside, Nathan moved with careful urgency. The fire in the hearth had been coaxed back to life, and now licked at the logs, casting long shadows across the pine floor. He laid the 3 puppies down on a thick wool blanket in front of the fire, gently positioning their trembling bodies to absorb as much warmth as possible. The black one, alert but weak, stared up at him, his chest rising too fast for comfort. The tan one whimpered softly, curling into the crook of the gray pup, who still hadn't made a sound. Nathan peeled off his soaked jacket and knelt beside them, reaching for a small metal box under the couch. It was a first aid kit he hadn't opened in months, not since he cut his hand chopping wood last winter. The gauze inside was slightly yellowed but clean. The antiseptic stung as he dabbed it on their wounds. The black pup had blood crusted along one ear and swollen pads, likely torn by bouncing against metal. The tan one had bruises beneath her fur and a long raw scrape down her side. But it was the gray one that worried him most. The pup's breathing was shallow, its lips pale, and one eye barely open. Nathan gently touched its side ribs, were showing too thin even for a stray. He looked around the room, trying to remember where he had stored the old fleece blankets. His gaze caught a photo on the mantel, Rachel holding Molly on her hip, both laughing, cheeks red with cold. The Christmas before the accident. He stared at it for a long moment, then rose and walked to the closet. In the back, buried under unused camping gear, he found what he was looking for. 3 small baby blankets. They still smelled faintly of cedar and something older memories he wasn't sure he could name. He returned to the fireplace and wrapped each pup separately. The gray one went into the softest of the 3, blue with stitched yellow stars. That had been Molly's favorite. Nathan sat back, cross-legged, elbows on his knees, watching them as the fire warmed the room. The sound of the storm outside faded into a steady backdrop, like the ocean in his ears. He wasn't sure what he was doing. He hadn't cared for another living thing in years, hadn't wanted to. But now these 3 creatures, abandoned, broken, were lying in his home like they'd always belonged. As midnight approached, Nathan realized the gray pup was deteriorating. Its breath had slowed, and a faint rattle had developed in its throat. He leaned close and whispered, "Hey, stay with me, okay? You've made it this far." The pup didn't respond. With a quiet curse, Nathan stood, grabbed the keys to the Jeep, and gently gathered the pup into a thick towel. He looked at the other 2. "I'll be back," he murmured. The black one gave a weak bark. The tan one barely opened her eyes. Nathan left the fire burning and the door locked behind him. Rain had turned to sleet, and the forest shimmered like glass under the headlights. He drove with both hands clenched on the wheel, the towel-covered bundle cradled in the passenger seat. His mind raced. The nearest vet was a woman he'd never met, someone new in town, if he remembered right. He hadn't stepped foot into Rainmere proper in weeks, maybe more. Too many people, too many questions. But this wasn't about him. 15 minutes later, he pulled up to a small brick building with a wooden sign, Rainmere Animal Clinic. A light glowed in the front window. He killed the engine, stepped into the cold, and rushed to the door. Inside, the scent of antiseptic and wet fur filled the air. A woman looked up from behind the counter. She was in her mid-30s, with auburn hair pulled into a tight bun and tired eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Dr. Julia Hartley. She wore jeans under her white coat, and her boots were still damp from the weather. Nathan didn't speak at first. He simply held out the bundle. "Found him like this," he said. Julia's expression softened. She took the pup and placed it on the examination table, her hands moving with practiced calm. "Severely underweight," she murmured. "Dehydrated, low body temperature. It's going to be close." She glanced up. "You bring him here, you give him a shot. That matters." Nathan nodded. "The others are at home. Hurt, but not like this." "I'll stabilize him," she said, already attaching an IV. "You can wait here. Heat's better than the truck." Nathan sat down in the corner, shoulders hunched, watching her work. As she moved, he noticed the faint tremor in her left hand, likely from hours of strain, but her eyes focused, and kind never wavered. After 20 minutes, Julia exhaled slowly. "He's not out of the woods, but he's fighting." Nathan whispered, "Good." And for the first time in 3 years, something in his chest tight and rusted shifted. By the time Nathan returned to the cabin, the sleet had turned into a heavy, wet snow that clung to every branch and blanketed the world in silence. The sky was an endless gray, and his breath fogged up the windshield as the Jeep rumbled up the gravel path. In the passenger seat, wrapped tightly in a heated towel and sleeping under the influence of fluids and warmth, was the gray puppy, Doctor. Hartley had offered to keep him overnight, but Nathan had refused. Something about the idea of leaving him behind felt wrong. The pup hadn't stirred, but his breathing was more stable now, faint puffs of steam rising from his small nose. Nathan parked, turned off the engine, and gathered the bundle into his arms. The night was quiet except for the crunch of his boots and the wind sifting through the trees. Inside, the cabin had held the heat from the fire surprisingly well. The other 2 puppies were still curled on the blanket where he'd left them, their eyes wide and blinking as he entered. The black one barked softly, tail thumping once. The cream-colored one gave a soft whimper and scooted slightly toward the warmth of the hearth. Nathan set the gray pup down beside them and added another log to the fire, watching as sparks flared and shadows danced along the walls. The room smelled of wood, smoke, pine, resin, and something else, something tender, like memory. He sat down, cross-legged on the rug, the puppies in a loose pile nearby. Their bodies trembled occasionally, not from fear anymore, but from the slow release of tension. Nathan let the quiet stretch, letting the fire crackle and the wind rattle the windows. Then, almost without realizing it, he spoke. "I should have named her Star," he said, voice low, eyes fixed on the dancing flames. "Molly. She used to draw stars everywhere, napkins, windows, dirt, said they were little promises in the sky." He paused. "She was 6, Rachel. She was the one who held us together." The words hung in the air like smoke. He looked down at the black puppy. You look like you've got a voice in you." The pup blinked, ears twitching. "You barked at me the first time, made yourself known. I think Echo suits you." Echo wagged his tail faintly, the first true response. Nathan turned to the cream-colored pup. You haven't made a sound, but your eyes are too big for a world this broken." He reached over, brushing a smudge of dirt from her fur. "Luna, you look like the moon when it's too tired to shine." The puppy leaned into his hand, then rested her chin on her paws. Finally, Nathan looked at the gray one, still unmoving, wrapped in the baby blanket that once belonged to Molly. "You're the one I was sure wouldn't make it," he said softly. "Ash, that's what you feel like, the last ember that refuses to go out." He didn't realize he was crying until his throat caught. He wiped at his face roughly, more angry than sad. The fire popped, and outside the snow thickened. It was the kind of storm that erased everything sound, tracks, the edges of the world. He stood and moved to the stove, heating water for broth. He opened a dusty can of chicken, shredded it with a fork, and stirred it into a bowl. After it cooled, he returned to the puppies. Echo tried to stand but failed. Luna flinched at first, but then licked the edge of the bowl. Nathan spoon-fed them slowly, murmuring encouragement. When he reached Ash, he dipped his finger in the broth and touched it to the pup's lips. Nothing. Then, after a few seconds, A flicker. Ash's tongue moved. It was barely a reaction, but it was there. "You're not quitting," Nathan said. "You hear me? You're not allowed." The fire had dimmed, the cabin wrapped in an amber glow. Nathan settled into the couch, laying an extra quilt across his legs. Echo curled beside him, tiny body pressed against his ribs. Luna crept up more hesitantly, but eventually rested her head on his thigh. Ash remained by the fire, swaddled in Molly's old stars. Nathan watched their breathing, slow and shallow but alive. He hadn't spoken that much in a single night since the funeral. The silence afterward had become a kind of armor-soundless days, voiceless nights. But tonight, something had shifted, not healed, but shifted. He looked at the fire, then at the pups, then at the framed photo above the mantel. "Rachel," he whispered, "I don't know if this is right, but it feels like something." Morning broke late in Rainmere. The storm had buried the small town in a heavy quilt of snow, muting everything but the distant creak of pines and the groan of rooftops under white weight. Nathan parked the Jeep in front of the clinic just as a plow passed, its rumble cutting through the silence like a blunt saw. He turned to the passenger seat, where Ash lay curled in the same fleece blanket, breathing slow but steady. Nathan scooped him into his arms carefully and walked across the icy sidewalk. Inside, the warmth of the clinic was immediate, the scent of disinfectant and cedar familiar now. A Christmas wreath hung lopsided on the front desk, half lit. Dr. Julia Hartley emerged from the back, wearing a thick navy sweater under her lab coat. Her auburn hair was loose today, damp at the ends, and her boots left faint wet prints across the tile floor. She had the kind of calm that didn't falter under pressure, the kind born not from softness but from survival. "He made it through the night?" she asked, her voice low but alert. Nathan nodded. Still breathing, eating a little. Julia took Ash from his arms and placed him on a padded exam table. Her fingers moved gently across his ribs, checking temperature, gums, and hydration. After a few minutes, she exhaled through her nose, then looked up at Nathan. "You said the other two showed similar injuries? Rope burns? Swelling in the joints?" "Yeah, black one's got torn pads, the tan one, skittish, flinches when touched." Julia leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Nathan, I've seen this before. Not exact, but close enough. These pups weren't just dumped. They were likely part of a batch trained too early, or handled wrong, or both." Nathan's jaw tightened. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying someone tried to make them into something they weren't ready to be. Probably for Work 9 training, detection units, maybe even private security contractors. But they didn't pass. So instead of care, they got sold off. Or worse." Nathan didn't respond. He stared at Ash, who blinked slowly under the overhead light, small body rising and falling with each breath. "I have a friend," Julia added, "who works animal welfare in Bend. Name's Laura McKay. She's seen this kind of thing, especially in counties where enforcement's thin and backroad breeders fly under the radar." Julia pulled her phone from her coat and dialed without waiting for permission. A few minutes later, Nathan listened quietly as she explained the situation to the voice on the other end. He watched her as she spoke concise, direct, eyes flicking occasionally to Ash. Finally, she hung up. "She thinks she knows who's involved," Julia said. "There's a guy, Colton Rigsby, used to run K9 training for private firms in Nevada. He lost his contract 3 years ago. Rumors say he sells off the pups that don't make the cut. No records, no vet clearance, no oversight." "Billy Harrow?" Nathan asked. "Likely a middleman. Colton wouldn't be caught moving dogs himself anymore, not after what happened in Clark County." Nathan exhaled slowly. "Billy said they were cowards, called them worthless." Julia's jaw clenched. "Yeah, that tracks." She went to the back room, returned with a sealed envelope. "These are the charts. Documentation of Ash's injuries, plus what you told me. If anything happens, if someone comes looking, you'll need this." "Someone like Billy?" Nathan asked. Julia nodded. "If they think these pups have value, yeah, they might try to claim them." Nathan stared at the envelope in his hand. The paper felt heavier than it should. Let them try. He turned to go, but Julia called out softly, "Nathan?" He paused, glancing over his shoulder. "I know that look in your eyes," she said. "You're not just trying to help them. You're trying to redeem something, maybe yourself." He didn't answer, but his grip on the envelope tightened. Outside, the snow had softened to flurries. Nathan tucked Ash into the passenger seat again, and as he drove back through the narrow roads of Rainmere, a thought settled in his mind like ice along the windshield edge. This wasn't over, and whatever shadows were following these, pup she'd face them. The snow fell hard that night, blanketing the forest in a silence so dense it felt sacred. Nathan had stoked the fire twice already, the warmth doing little to soothe the growing knot in his chest. The pups were finally sleeping. Echo stretched out beside the hearth, one paw twitching in a dream. Luna curled near Nathan's boots, her eyes closed but ears still flicking at every creak of wind. And Ash, smaller but gaining strength, nestled inside the old laundry basket lined with flannel shirts. Nathan sat in his armchair, a thick book open in his lap but unread. He'd been jumpy all evening, eyes drifting to the window whenever the wind changed tone. Since leaving the clinic, the envelope from Julia had not left the table by the door. It sat there like a warning sign, stark against the grainy wood. Just after midnight, the sound camine engine, distant at first, then louder, grinding through the snow-covered path like something angry and unwelcome. Nathan stood slowly. He moved without panic, but with practiced precision, like a man who'd walked the edge of danger more than once. He walked to the small closet near the kitchen, pulled out the .30-30 lever-action rifle that once belonged to his grandfather, and loaded 3 rounds, not for violence, for presence. The headlights cut through the falling snow as a black pickup truck lurched into view, parking sideways just 20 feet from the porch. Nathan stepped outside, snow crunching under his boots. The wind slapped his face with cold, but he didn't flinch. 3 figures stepped out of the truck. The driver was unmistakable, Billy Harrow, shoulders hunched beneath a tan canvas jacket, mouth curled in a sneer. Behind him stood 2 men Nathan didn't recognize. One was tall and lean, clean-shaven with a tight buzz cut, and the other heavy-set, face obscured by a hood, hands stuffed in his pockets. Billy stepped forward, holding a plastic folder in one hand. "You got something that belongs to me," he called out over the wind. Nathan didn't move. "They don't belong to anyone." Billy laughed, a cold, mirthless sound. "I got papers, says otherwise. Signed and notarized. You're harboring property, friend. I'm just here to reclaim it." From behind him, the cabin door creaked open. Echo was first stepping out onto the porch, tail low but body alert. His ears were perked, his stance steady. Nathan didn't say a word. The pup had chosen his ground. Billy scowled. "What's this? You training them now?" "No," Nathan said. "They're learning who to trust." The tall man reached into his coat, but froze as Echo let out a low growl, sharp and deliberate. Nathan raised the rifle nut, aiming it, just lifting it to chest level. The message was clear. You make a move, and this ends differently. Inside the house, Luna began to bark high-pitched and panicked, not in fear, but in warning. Ash whimpered, and something about that sound pierced the moment. From the tree line behind the cabin, headlights flared. A second vehicle smaller, government-issued crunched into the clearing. It was the sheriff's SUV, the blue strobe light flashing but silent. The door opened, and out stepped Sheriff Howard Maynard, a man in his late 50s with a wide frame and a voice like gravel. Howard had been the law in Rainmere for 2 decades. He was known for his slow speech and heavy boots, but no one questioned his presence. He wore a dark coat over his uniform and a felt hat pulled low against the snow. "Evening, Billy," he said. Billy froze. "Sheriff, this don't concern you." "Oh, but it does," Howard replied. "Dr. Hartley called me, said there was trouble brewing out here, said you might come waving fake papers." Nathan nodded slightly toward the sheriff but didn't lower the rifle. Howard stepped forward and took the folder from Billy's hand. He flipped through it slowly, eyes squinting under the brim of his hat. Then he sighed and held it up. "This is trash, stamped with a dead notary's name, and these dogs. They're listed as destroyed 3 weeks ago." Billy's jaw twitched. "They're mine." "No, they're evidence now. And you're trespassing with intent to intimidate." The sheriff turned to the tall man. "Name?" "Doesn't matter," the man mumbled. "It will in a minute," Howard said. "Put your hands where I can see them." The rest unfolded quickly. The deputies that arrived moments later moved with calm efficiency. Billy protested, curses spilling from his lips as he was cuffed and led back to the truck. His last words before being pushed inside were aimed straight at Nathan. "You think they love you? They'll run the first chance they get, just like everyone else." But before Nathan could speak, Luna slipped through the open door and padded down the steps. She walked past the deputies and stopped beside Nathan, pressing her small, cream-colored body against his leg. Her eyes didn't leave Billy, and her tail curled not in fear, but in quiet defiance. Nathan looked down at her, then at Echo, who had taken a step closer to the retreating truck. Ash whimpered again from inside, but this time it sounded less like pain and more like strength coming back. The truck disappeared into the storm. The sheriff gave Nathan a nod. "You did good. We'll be in touch." Nathan watched the lights vanish, then stepped back inside the cabin, his pulse slowing, the rifle still warm in his hands. The fire still burned low, casting soft orange light across the wooden walls. Echo settled beside the hearth. Luna curled near the door, and Ash had lifted his head for the first time since morning. The days that followed passed with a quiet rhythm Nathan hadn't known he needed. Snow melted into slush, and then into soft patches of grass that poked through like promises. The forest around the cabin seemed to breathe again, birds returning to the trees, wind shifting from howl to whisper. Inside, warmth lingered not just from the fireplace, but from something harder to define. Ash was healing. His strength returned first, and his eyes sharp, alert, watching every movement Nathan made. Then came his appetite, followed by small, playful growls when Luna nudged him too hard during their clumsy games on the rug. Echo, always the sentinel, took to patrolling the porch like he had appointed himself guardian of all that mattered. His limp from the paw wound had faded. He walked strong now, ears high, tail steady. Dr. Julia Hartley visited once every 3 days to check on Ash. She no longer brought her stethoscope unless necessary. Mostly, she sat by the hearth, sipping Nathan's bitter coffee and quietly watching the dogs tumble across the cabin floor. Her voice had softened since that first meeting. Her laugh, rare but genuine, left traces in the corners of her eyes. One morning, Julia arrived with someone new. He stepped out of her car carefully, unfolding a tall frame from the passenger seat. Mark Ellison, a retired Army medic in his early 50s, wore a faded green parka and had a kind face worn by sun and silence. His left leg moved stiffly beneath him, an old wound, he said, from a blast in Kandahar. His beard was trimmed short, and his dark eyes held the kind of sadness that didn't ask for pity. Julia introduced them briefly. Mark helps at a therapy center downstate. They're starting a canine-assisted program for vets. Nathan shook his hand. It was rough, honest. "I heard about what you did," Mark said, kneeling beside Ash. "This one, he'd be good with people like me." Ash sniffed Mark's hand, then without hesitation, climbed into his lap. Mark smiled. It wasn't wide, but it reached his eyes. That night, Nathan didn't sleep much. He watched the dogs, all 3 of them curled near the hearth. Luna, as always, had found the closest spot to his chair. Echo, dignified as ever, lay with his chin resting on his paws. Ash, now healthy, stretched with a sigh. Nathan stared at the ceiling. He knew what came next. Over the next week, the decisions came one by one. Mark returned with a soft blue vest marked Therapy and Training. Ash didn't resist. He moved with quiet confidence beside the man, responding to commands, offering calm touches at the right time. Julia facilitated the adoption paperwork, and Nathan didn't object. He saw what Ash could be for someone else. For many, someone else's. Then came Echo, a woman named Rose Danner, a former corrections officer turned trauma counselor, had heard about him through the vet network. She came up to the cabin herself tall, with silver streaks in her dark braid and hands that didn't tremble even when Echo barked once at her approach. She didn't flinch. Instead, she sat on the porch steps and waited. Echo came to her on his own terms. She was strong, patient, and broken in a way Echo understood. The day they drove away, Echo sat in the back seat, ears twitching as the engine rumbled to life. He looked back once. Nathan stood on the porch, one hand resting on Luna's head. The pup didn't move until the truck disappeared down the trail. Then she leaned against his leg and sighed. She hadn't let him out of her sight in weeks. Julia came by one last time with papers in hand. "If you want to keep her," she said, "we can make it official." Nathan didn't hesitate. "I want to." She smiled, then nodded. "She chose you." Luna settled into life with him as if she'd always been there. She followed him through the trees on long hikes, her cream-colored coat catching the morning light like a flame. She waited outside while he chopped wood, patted silently beside him during grocery runs to town, and pressed her head into his hand each night before they slept. On the first true spring morning, Nathan stood on the ridge behind the cabin. The sun spilled over the forest like honey. Below, the land stretched wide and green, dotted with mist still clinging to the lower trees. Luna sat beside him, tail swishing gently, ears perked at the call of distant birds. In his hand was a photograph-phone of the few he hadn't boxed away. Rachel and Molly. A birthday picnic. Smiles, open sky, arms full of joy. Nathan folded it carefully and slid it into his coat. He looked down at Luna. "We're not fixing what's gone," he said, his voice low. "But we're building something new." Luna looked up at him. She didn't need to bark. Her eyes said everything. Together, they turned toward the trail. Sometimes healing doesn't arrive with noise or fanfare. Sometimes it walks in quietly, on 4 trembling legs, and curls up beside you in the dark. Nathan didn't set out to be a savior. He simply chose not to look away. And in that choice, lives were changed, 3 little ones who needed someone, and a man who didn't realize how much he still had left to give. In the end, what matters isn't what we've lost, but what we're still willing to protect. Sometimes, we save each other. If this story moved you, let us know where in the world you're listening from, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and join our growing family of listeners who believe in second chances.